Hello everybody, it's Helena Bird, and today I'm going to talk you through a Kandinsky Remixed Watercolour project that I embarked on thanks to a YouTuber called Denise Love. Before I start talking you through the project, I need to give a massive shout out to Denise, who is one of my favourite YouTubers and who constantly inspires me with her amazing paintings. She created a video, which I will link to in the description, I think it was last week, and it was all about Kandinsky. Well, that immediately caught my attention because Kandinsky is one of my all-time favourite painters. I went and watched the video in which Denise created these gorgeous concentric circles with watercolour, and she talked about a course that she had made about Kandinsky. Now, I don't actually have any money for art courses at the moment. The way I get paid from writing my books, I kind of get money in a little lump, and then that has to last me, and then it's a little bit tight until the next lump of money comes through. So I'm waiting on my next royalty check, and when it happens, I'm going to go back through the courses that Denise has made on Skillshare, and I'm going to do them all. In the meantime, when I clicked on her link for her Kandinsky course, I found that there was a month free. So I'm going to be embarking on that Kandinsky course very soon. Isn't it generous when these platforms give us an opportunity to properly trial their products and see whether or not the teaching and the resources are for us? I think that's fantastic, and I can't wait to dive into that course whilst I'm waiting for my royalty check to arrive. Before I delve into Denise's course, I wanted to create a sort of log of where I was at with my watercolour and painting skills in general, which I must admit is not a very high quality level. I'm very much a beginning painter, and I'm very honest and open about that on my channel. I am much more of a mixed media person rather than creating some big painted masterpiece, but certainly watching Denise's channel has built my confidence and my desire to improve my painting skills and just keep showing up to the blank page. So I decided that this piece wasn't going to be some big masterpiece. It was going to be an exploration of a colour palette that I'd been interested in exploring from the notes I'd been making in my sketchbook, which was blue, orange and yellow. I obviously add black, white and gold into that as well. And I know this is something that Denise does, and it just helps create more contrast when you're creating a piece rather than just having those three fundamental colours. So blue, yellow and orange, I wanted to explore that, and I thought what better way but to take some inspiration from the piece that Denise had done and from Kandinsky himself and do something concentric. But never wanting to just do the same as everybody else, I decided I was going to do triangles. So I was going to get out a piece of watercolour paper, divide it into 12 squares, and then I was going to create watercolour triangles in each box using the colour palette I'd selected. I would try different shades of the blue, of the yellow and of the orange. I might add in some gold, some black and some white, and I'll just keep going until each square was filled. As I said, my intention was never to create something that was a polished finished piece, but actually the end result of this project ended up being one of my favourite pages in my entire sketchbook so far. Now, the raw painting was not what ended up being my favourite page in my sketchbook so far. I will show you what I did with the raw painting that made it one of my favourite sketchbook pages. But I think if anything, this video will show you that even when you painted something that you're just experimenting and playing and trying to explore something, you can sometimes turn that into something that becomes very precious to you and indeed is a record of something you explored, but also is aesthetically pleasing, either in your sketchbook or in your art journal, wherever you may create. One of the biggest challenges I find with watercolour is managing the amount of water on the brush and also the amount of pigment on the brush. And as such, I tend to put very little water on the brush because I want to maintain control. That doesn't always give me the effect that I want. So I'm still looking for that happy medium with my watercolour and still getting used to painting in watercolour where there's perhaps a little bit less control over the pigment and over the liquid itself. If you asked me what my favourite medium was, I would say acrylic, but I don't want to stay in my comfort zone my whole artistic life. That's not the point. The point is to swim out into the unknown and try out some new things. Even when I set out to create a watercolour, I'll often know in my mind that I'm only going to put the first layer down in watercolour, and then after that I'm going to come back with pencil crayons, wax crayons and pens, and I'm going to refine it and make it something that, I would be happy to call a finished piece. I'm not convinced I will ever, although you never like to say never, that I will ever create a pure watercolour piece where I don't want to do more to it. But you never know, maybe that's a goal for my future artistic life. So looking back at this video, I can already see at this point that there's going to be some things about this original raw painting that I'm not going to like because of the kind of artist that I am and the kind of parameters I like to set for myself. So for one thing, the triangles are not all centered in the squares. So this is going to create some odd angles. It's probably going to make it look a little bit off kilter in places. That in itself is not a bad thing. It can actually make it more interesting. But what I found as I got further and further towards the outside, particularly because I'd worked with triangles rather than circles, which have an uneven amount of negative space on each side, unlike a circle, which would have a fairly even amount of negative space except at the corners, that I couldn't fit as many triangles in the square as I wanted to. I would often find that the triangles would go outside the space, kind of off the page, and what I wanted was to create many different layers. So the choice of my shape did really impact how the finished piece looked within that square shape that I drew out originally on this piece of watercolour. If I'd just chosen circles, I probably would have been slightly more satisfied with how the raw painting turned out. But I wanted to experiment with triangles because the place where I got this watercolour palette from, this blue, orange and yellow, is from a local bridge that I really love. And that local bridge, if you look at it, is made up of metal triangles. So I really, really wanted to explore the shapes and the colours of that bridge and just see what came out of it. This point that we're hitting here, where I'm starting to fill in the squares, is about the time at which I would normally, in a project, start to wonder and second guess whether or not I should even finish the painting. It's ridiculous really, isn't it? Because you never know what anything looks like until you've finished it. But there are definitely times when I'm painting where I think, oh, should I even bother finishing this because it's just not looking how I want it to look. And I do know a lot of artists speak about this. They speak about the fact that it goes through an ugly phase, every single piece of work that you do. And you have to push through that ugly phase in order to get to the good stuff at the end. And the most eloquent way I've ever heard this put is in a book that I mention regularly on this channel, and it's called The Practice by Seth Godin. And in that book, he says that the words "so far" and "yet" are some of the most important words that an artist or a creative can use. So, to give you an example with this piece, this painting isn't looking how I would like it to look yet. I'm not as good at using watercolours as I would like to be so far. It indicates and reminds us that we are on a creative journey and that today's attempt is just an attempt. Every single time we come to the canvas, we are starting a new attempt, that's it. And every time we do that attempt, we're going to learn something about our craft. I definitely learnt a lot about this colour palette and a lot about these shapes and how they fit in the boxes just by doing this. And although I can't say that the raw painting felt in any way finished, I knew that was the foundation for what was going to come next in terms of my learning and in terms of my exploration of this colour palette. Which light and dark hues go well together? What happens if you add a lot of orange in one box? What happens if you add a lot of blue? What happens if you add a lot of yellow? I actually found that I wasn't a fan of adding lots of yellow, which surprised me. I actually probably preferred the triangles that had blue in them the most and were dominant blue. This, of course, is entirely subjective, and somebody else might have come along and made a very different decision about what looked best. That's just how I felt as I was putting the paints down. So there would have been nothing wrong with me putting this piece in my sketchbook as it was. A sketchbook is usually a place where you do put all your experimentation. For me, it's a little bit different in that I tend to only put pieces that I'm truly happy with and want to keep forever. Everything else, well, I'll link to a video below to tell you what I do with those pieces. It's perhaps a bit shocking to some people what I do to my own art, in that I am very happy to cut up pieces that I'm not 100% happy with and create new things with them. So my sketchbook is a place for things where I'm just truly happy with how they are expressing, that I feel like they're expressing the things that I want to express, exploring the things that I want to explore. I've only got limited space in my craft room, so I just simply can't keep every single piece that I play or explore with. I'll always usually take digital copies, either a photograph or a video, and that's why my YouTube channel is so precious to me, because I've got this wonderful community of people who come along to chat about art. And I've also got a place where I can digitally keep a record of my artistic journey. And if you watch my videos from the beginning, that is quite a journey. That is quite a lot of confidence building and exploring in the world of journaling and abstract art. So I love having that record, but I'm probably not going to keep every single last physical piece that I create. I simply can't. And so some of it does go into my sketchbook for keeping forever, and some of it goes into my box of cuts where I then make new abstract art from it, which you can see all about that in that video that I'll link to below. So what I start doing then is getting this piece and cutting triangles out of it. I take the piece that I made, cut a triangle out, and then use that triangle as a template for all the other triangles I'm cutting out of the piece. What I realise halfway through cutting out the triangles is that if I cut the bit out in between the triangles, so half of one square and half another, I get this really cool effect where you see two different slants on the same colour palette. And if you look at the squares in front of you now, you can see that in the third square along at the top, that's one of those triangles that's been cut half from each square, and there'll be some other examples in the final composition. But essentially, I found that not following the lines of my triangles made for very interesting cuts that showed me lots about the colour palette that I've been exploring. So once I've cut the triangles out, I then look at arranging them in the 12 squares. I'd actually cut more than 12 triangles out of the original piece because, as I say, I cut some of the negative space from around the triangles, and that made for some of the most interesting triangles, I think, in this composition. If I had just cut the triangles that I painted, a lot of the negative space would have been lost, a lot of the colour combinations would have been lost. But cutting this way around the negative space and cutting that into triangles, that meant that I could keep more of the original composition and more of the exploration with the colour. So I'm gluing these pieces down one by one, and I've got an absolute hum in my heart as I'm doing it, because I can already see, looking at this page, looking at these triangles, the way the colours merge together, the way they fit together, that this is going to be one of my favourite pages in my entire sketchbook. If you told me when I started messing around with watercolour at the beginning that I was about to create something that would sit in one of my favourite pages in my sketchbook, I'd have told you I don't think that's going to happen because I'm not very good at watercolour. And yet, objectively speaking, all of these triangles were made by me in watercolour. I just cut them in a way that made them more pleasing to my eye and made them more easily presented in these lovely boxes that I've drawn. Just like Denise did in her video about concentric circles, drawing those 12 boxes and putting the composition in each box. Every time I look back at this piece in my sketchbook, I am going to remember how I started out this piece, so nervous and tentative about using my watercolours, as I always am when I pick up a watercolour brush, because it just never does exactly what I'm imagining it's going to do in my head. And then ending up with something that not only explores the colour palette that I wanted to explore in many different ways, giving me lots of options with future compositions to draw from, but actually ends up being a piece that I would actually scan and send to other people as a postcard. That's how proud I am of this final composition. So this is your reminder, in case you need one, that you never know where a piece is going to go. And it's given me some ideas for future compositions that I might not even paint in triangles or circles or squares specifically. I might just get the colour palette down that I want on the watercolour paper, and then I might take that away and cut it into either triangles or circles or squares, whatever it is that I want to create, and then create concentric layers in each box. And that is going to be another interesting way for me to explore watercolour. I always use watercolour for my experiments because it's quick to dry and I can quickly see how colours look together, and it's good practice. So I often know that nobody's going to see these finished watercolour pieces. So there you go. I don't even normally show people these videos or photos of my watercolours because I just think that there are much better watercolour artists on YouTube that you could watch besides me. And yet, today I decided I would share this because it's actually turned out much better than I was expecting, with a bit of cutting and sticking. And I think it shows that even if you're not happy with your original composition, your raw painting, there might be something you can do with it that is interesting and that teaches you something about art, composition, and the way in which colour and shape sit together on the page. Because of the way I have cut this piece up and stuck it in a different composition from the original raw painting, I've titled it Kandinsky Remixed, which I think is a fair description of it. And I would be interested to know if you have done any experiments in watercolour that have surprised you. Have you ever done this and cut up a piece of watercolour and created it into something new because you weren't satisfied with the original painting? Or have you in some other way remixed the work of a classic artist? If you've got something to say about any of those topics or anything else that's relating to this piece or something that I've done with this piece, I would love to hear about it in the comments. And I'm sure other people will also learn from the comments if you leave information about what you've been up to in your artwork and maybe how you're going to use this piece as inspiration or how you've done similar things yourself in the past. I learn a lot by reading other people's YouTube comments, so please don't think that it's not worth sharing the information. It always is. We're shortly going to finish this video with a close-up of the finished triangles in my sketchbook, all glued in with their backgrounds painted. I hope you enjoy that. I also hope you've really enjoyed this video. For now, I'd just like to say one last thank you to Denise, one last thank you to you for watching. There'll be another video along soon. Until then, take care, and I'll see you next time.